in Anaheim, California, at the place that used to be lovingly referred to as the Pond in Anaheim, but now the Hana Center, where Arnold Barboza fought in front of a pretty lively crowd. He drew a solid crowd to the Honda Center, being from El Monte, being from the LA area, beats Kenneth Sims as an underdog. And this is good stuff from Arnold Barboza because he was an underdog to Jack Catterall and beat him, and now he beats Kenneth Sims as an underdog. Pair that with a win over Jose Ramirez, and Barboza has built a solid resume for himself. And credit to him because I didn't know if he'd win this fight. Kenneth Sims was the fighter pursuing this fight. I happen to know Kenny was in his DMs on Instagram calling him out, wanting this fight. Barboza wanted a bigger name coming off the Teofimo Lopez fight. Eventually, Golden Boy presents him Kenneth Sims as a main event. He takes it. He wins it in decisive fashion and makes that crowd that showed up pretty happy to go home with their fighter winning the fight. Southern California Mexican fighters, tough to beat, and Kenneth Sims, who I thought could win this fight, coming from Chicago, not the pedigree that Southern California comes from. Even though Barboza is not a champion, this was not an exciting fight, but a fight fought at a very solid technical skill level. Good chess match, not without a lot of action, unfortunately, but a good level fight between two good, competent professionals in that main event. Raheem, what were some of your takeaways from this fight?
Entertaining is always subjective, right? Like, I
Yeah.
do understand what you mean and the fact that maybe it wasn't exciting, but I was entertained. I did enjoy watching it to that extent. I liked really the skill portrayed, but the fundamental battle that was had between the two of them, the fact that they decided that this thing would be decided somewhat in the pocket, as opposed to disengaging, taking a step off the line, stepping back. When a punch was landed on the inside, a counter punch would be landed. There would be very little distance between the fighters for almost the entirety of the fight. They were always both ready to engage. I thought the power shots probably left a little bit to be desired accumulatively wise, but the body work, the fundamentals being adhered to, the combination punching from Barbosa, the fluidity of the fight were all entertainment factors for me. I enjoyed watching it. It definitely, missed the big, super big punching power that can be exciting. It missed, it was never a slugfest really, but punch selection was another thing to watch and be entertained by in this fight. Like, this was a fighting fans fight to watch. And, again, it was an example of where fights don't necessarily have to be exciting to be entertaining. And if you know what you're watching, you can find narratives inside that fight to keep you engaged. I really enjoyed the display from both fighters. I'm surprised Sim was so confident in making this fight happen and feeling like this was his roadmap. However, it does it does speak well of a fighting man's mentality. Like, he had to know this was a challenge. It wasn't a razor thin fight in the sense that I don't think the rounds were even towards the end of the fight, but I do feel like the rounds themselves, many were close
Mm-hmm.
with Barbosa winning them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's another thing that you have to have watched quite a few fights to understand. While it wasn't a close fight, it was a competitive fight. And for the factors that I presented, I think it was an entertaining fight.
Yeah, Barbosa was just a little sharper, a little quicker. Against Teofimo Lopez, he was not the quick twitch guy. Teofimo Lopez was. Against Kenneth Sims, he was. He was a little twitchier, a little quicker on his counters, a little sharper, a step ahead. And not two steps ahead, not three steps ahead. To your point, almost every round was competitive. And I love you mentioning the body work. Both fighters landed beautiful body punching in this fight. Again, they got 19 knockouts between the two of them. So not really punchers at this level. So neither guy was ever really rocked or in danger of being dropped at any point in the fight. But Barboza was able to become the guy who, usually a fighter when they drop their lead hand, usually it's a good sign that they're the more comfortable guy. And he made Kenneth Sims from the opening round have to take that step forward, have to put his gloves up in more of a high guard position, more of the fight. And Barboza, he was the guy who had to do that against Teofimo Lopez. Teo got to be the guy with the lead hand down. And the word they use for it now, Raheem, that the in vogue word for that is getting into a flow state. He was the guy able to get into his flow state, into his groove, change up the looks a few times, and Sims had to keep coming forward. For me, and I do think the 120, 108 scorecard was not indicative of the fight. I think 117, 111 was more appropriate. And most of the rounds, as we've said, were close. And then to another point before I get to the crux of the fight, which was to me the fourth and the fifth rounds, when I mentioned the pedigree heading into this fight, Sims was the favorite despite Barboza having the better resume, despite Barboza having the better record at 32-1 versus 22-3 for Sims heading in. And when I talked about that Southern California Mexican Chicano pedigree against Sims, where I'm not talking so much about the Black American pedigree, which, not to get too deep in the weeds of this, is the best lineage in boxing alongside Mexican and Mexican American pedigree. But what I mean is Sims is from Chicago, which is not doesn't have the Midwest glory of Michigan. It doesn't have his number champions from the DMV area or from the East Coast like New York or New Jersey or from California, where a lot of great Black American fighters come from. Chicago probably has a lot of talent, but hasn't had a lot of talent come out in the professional boxing sphere. Whereas that Chicano Southern California background, and I bring it up because Samantha got to watch Gabriela Fundora on the undercard. And Gabriela Fundora instantly earned a new fan in Samantha, who's been my wife, who's been watching boxing a long time. And Samantha is from originally East LA. She was born there. She grew up here in Vegas for a while. But I like to pump her up. She doesn't care about this stuff, but I like to pump her up and gas her up and go, yeah, look at those LA, look at that that Southern California Mexican girl. They about that action, like we are. That's the name of the show. And but I said, really though, babe, the lineage is something. When you look at De La Hoya, Leo Santa Cruz, Fernando Vargas, Raymond Murataya, Andy Ruiz, and Sebastian and Gabriela Fundora, and that's really just getting started. You can name about a dozen or so other names. So what I'm getting at, and Barboza hasn't proven himself to be of that caliber, and that's no disrespect to him. I think he's, a B plus level fighter, and so is Kenneth Sims. And these guys, everybody talks about there's levels to this, there's levels to this. These guys show just how excellent the level above them is, because what you were enjoying was the craftsmanship. And the reason why you got so many lulls in the fight is it's two counterpunchers. Two guys who are very good at counterpunching. Sims being forced to take the lead because he's actually not the more athletic fighter in this matchup. And these guys being able to counter each other's counters and being very intelligent. And like you said, having very good punch selection and placement shows you just how good the level above these very competent high-level pros are. Like Teofimo Lopez, who outclassed Arnold Barboza, and then Shakur Stevenson, who outclassed Teofimo Lopez. So this it can give you an appreciation for those levels. And I'll let you cook, and then I'll get to the fourth and fifth rounds, which to me were the crux of the fight.
For Sims' sake, you might have explained why he called out a fighter like Barbosa, which maybe gave me some pause. I was a bit perplexed, like, why would you think this is the fight for you? However, it's a fight he could have won. Of course, anybody could win a fight if they're better. It's a fight you could have won if you were better, but being from Chicago, that is a hard hat town. Mm-hmm. That is a kind of town to emerge from. You got to have some grit. You got to have the ability to challenge yourself and overcome adversity, if that just means surviving the winter. So to pick a Barboza, he's got to beat a guy that is a tough win and probably look good doing it if he wants to elevate his stardom, if he wants to be spoken of in that other class, if he wants to challenge himself and prove not only to the fans but to himself that he belongs in a higher class. So you take on a fighter that, even if you are in fact not the underdog, you know that to beat this guy, you're going to have to look good doing it. Uh-oh. Sorry about that. A little technical adjustment. You're gonna have to look good doing it. And he was beaten by Barbosa, but beaten by a fighter who had his own set of motivations. I think Barbosa believes he's better than what he showed in the Lopez fight, that he was coming off of a loss. And a lot of times a guy come off a loss and their ego won't let them be humbled. So they go for the knockout. They overextend. They're looking to prove something immediately by the first, second, or third round. They want to change change the tide of their career and get that confidence back. Barbosa done what we would tell a fighter to do in that situation, was go back to the fundamentals, back to the drawing board, make it simple, do the things that you know that got you here, and take the bravado and the ego out of it and get to work with the skills. That's exactly what we saw. That's what punch selection's about. Even when you talk about the lulls in the fight, I'd say the lulls were worth the wait, because what came off the back of the lulls was good punch selection, was quality engagement, was each fighter finding their moment and getting in there. And while Sims, again, I agree with you on the scorecards, it's a kind of wide scorecard to say that it's a close fight, but it was a competitive fight. And Barboza, I would say, landed accumulation of combination punches, great body work. Sims the same. But as far as bigger punches, if I were to, if just out of memory, like, oh, I remember kind of flashy punches, I think Sims probably landed some really good, hard, clean shots. I'm like, oh, granted, still probably didn't win him the round with the one shot, but those are some moments that I remember that maybe if he had been able to string a few more of those together, could have got him some more rounds. And this is a closer fight at the end of the day. There's something to be said for the cultures that different fighters come from. Like and that's, I think, ultimately what you're talking about when you talk about Black American fighters, whether they be from the East Coast or they be, California or wherever from which they hail. They have a flavor. They have some type of kind of unique rhythm, or if it's Philly, you're taught a very particular kind of style. We all are well versed in the Mexican style, and watching the two clash was a bit of art in a way, because the fundamentals were so adhered to. I was on a podcast last week with some comedians that were giving me a bunch of stick about whether or not boxing is a sport or an art. And I had to say it was an art because the guy made a good point about some element of the sport, but that's not a detraction from boxing. That is a compliment to the fact that there is an element of this that is art, that requires rhythm, that is timing, there is footwork, so there's some dance to it, there's a back and forth that is yin and yang from your opponent, the rhythm of the fight itself, all of that is at play when you have fighters that kind of, I believe, instinctively or have inherited a certain type of culture from which their ancestors come. And like you say, I don't want to get too deeper in the weeds on this thing, but there is a contrast on the same night to what we saw with Cacace and Dickens, excuse me, which was a fun fight to watch. It was maybe more exciting, even just because they were throwing haymakers and it was more one-sided, less competitive, I would say, while the scorecards could have, I think that was probably a shutout if I'm honest, but this fight we're talking about is more competitive, but that fight might be more exciting because the way the punches were thrown, I would say less sharp, less fundamentals adhered to. It's Ireland, it's the weekend of St. Patrick's Day, the crowd's into it, an Irish fighter versus a British fighter, there's a rivalry there, all the trappings, right? That's their culture. That's a certain kind of excitement. That's a certain type of entertainment. And it comes from where they hail and where they are. And this fight that we're talking about, Barbosa and Sims, a very different flavor. Crowd not quite the same level of energy as that out there, but the boxing was far more skilled in a certain way and executed more precisely. Two entirely different environments, two fighters or four fighters really from entirely different regions, coming from different heritages and putting on their own different type of entertainment that I think is invaluable to the sport of boxing, that really you can only get that kind of differentiation, that kind of quality variety and culture inside the sport that really maybe only boxing and possibly European football. I don't know enough about that kind of football to speak intelligibly about it, but I have been in enough football matches where they're into their football culture and stuff. But this is combat sport. It's unique and it really has something in it that is artistic. And that's, I think, what we saw from Barbosa and Sims, and in its own way, in a weird way, also what we saw from Cacace and Dickens.
Yeah, I think part of what you might be saying too is despite Dickens and Kakashi being for a world title, being for one of the four sanctioning titles, you saw more artistry and skill from two contenders in this welterweight fight, and really two super lightweights having their first fight at welterweight. And yeah, to simplify some of the things I was saying earlier about the fight is Barboza beat Sims to the punch a lot. And actually, I'm happy with all the points you made because it's almost like out of objectivity and wanting to have the audience understand, yes, we're telling the truth. I'm saying it wasn't a really exciting fight, but I enjoyed everything you enjoyed of it. The lulls are filled by positioning. And then, like you said, the result you wind up getting is worth what the lulls were created. The lulls are created by two intelligent counterpunchers setting things up. And then once they pull the trigger, it's good stuff. Even if nobody's getting knocked down, even if neither guy is getting hurt, that you could definitely say that leaves something to be desired. A few more splash moments, a few more highlight moments. But if you're a purist like we are, you could very well find yourself enjoying that. And I'm watching the fight, doing our due diligence for the show and everything. I'm watching it on my cell phone. I'm at a carnival for St. Patrick's Day. And I was glued to the whole thing. There was even one point where my son and his little friend want me to go on the ride with them. And the ride's spinning at like 30 miles an hour, and I'm still looking at the phone. And I'm like, all right, but I can't miss this action. And I was not just because it's work, but I was glued to the action for all 12 rounds. And that's without quote unquote explosive moments. And I think you're right. Sims, you could argue, landed some of the most eye-catching punches. I mean, he had a few hard right hands in the 12th round. He capped off the 4th round with one. But Barboza was just good at taking the play from him. And that was really highlighted by the 4th and 5th round I referenced earlier. So in the first 3 rounds, Mannix has Sims down 3-0. I think it's conceivable it could have been 2-1. You know, these were close rounds. The first round, I think Sims might have won. Second and third, I'd give to Barboza. But the point is, Barboza's a step ahead. He's beating him to the punch a little bit. And Sims in the 4th round started to make his mind up, at least in that round. Let me go get him. Let me push the pace. Let me be first and last, which I think was ultimately going to be his path to victory. But Barboza, to his credit, got his respect with some shots and was harder to hit than he may have thought, was a little quicker than he may have thought, a little craftier than he may have thought. Jack Catterall found out the same thing. I couldn't just snipe this guy with a left hand. This guy is crafty. And in the 4th round, I thought Sims won that round, and he fought well, and he started to go downhill behind his jab a little bit. And then in round 5, Barboza totally took the play away from him. And I thought took some of the wind out of his sails, took some of his gusto out of him. And then from round 6 to 12, Sims was caught in between game plans. He had a number of rounds on the back end where he was kind of listless, kind of defeated, kind of out of ideas. He said after the fight, Raheem, he may have pulled his hamstring, that his leg around the 2nd round got very heavy on him. And I actually love Kenny. I love dealing with him outside the ring. He's a really solid person. And part of why he felt he wanted Barboza was his ambition of getting out of this level of B-level fighters, B-plus level fighters, which is not meant at a diss at all. Like I said earlier, they're very proficient, competent professionals. But he wants to get that A-level fight. He was the WBA mandatory for over a year and never got his title shot. Then he got moved down the rankings. Then he winds up fighting Duarte, who is in that same realm, trying to Duarte and Barboza got a bite at the apple. They got to fight Ryan and Lopez, and Sims is doing everything he can to get to that level. So he pushed for this fight, and he believes he could beat a Barboza because he's rated, to use a British term, all the wonderful fighters he spars with in the Vegas gyms, from Shakur Stevenson to Devin Haney to Gervonta Davis, they rate him. They give him the nod. This man can fight, and he can fight. And so I'm pushing for this. I'm going to get past Barboza, and I'm going to get that bite at the apple that has been being so elusive for him. So I say all that to say it's fresh coming from a guy sitting in the third level of his house talking boxing on this camera that isn't always high def enough for me, when he just fought in a main event at a major arena where the Ducks play, made 250 grand, which is much more in one night than I've ever made. But Kenny, unfortunately, is at the championship level a come up short guy, right? And when you talk about your leg hurting after the fight, that's not really going to hold weight with people, whether it's true or not. I don't doubt that it's not true, but he found a way to come up short, and Barboza took the play from him in the 5th round and stayed a step ahead of him, and he couldn't find a way to get that momentum rolling for him. And Barboza just wouldn't allow him to over 12 rounds.
I think that shift from Barboza was imposed with creativity. We
Yeah.
talk about fundamentals, we talk about counter punching, even the lulls and what they create. However, that shift in the fight came when Barboza was then able to create off of the fundamentals, which is why you tell a fighter, especially after a loss, who does possess those skills, to go back to the drawing board, simplify it, keep it inside of what got you there, and then work off of that. Like they say, don't chase the knockout and it'll come. This is what we saw from Barboza, and when he switched into that phase, Sims couldn't keep up. Sims wasn't able to then be creatively defensive and find counter punches off the counter punching, or really the combination punching, I believe at that point became the star of the show. You would see Barboza happy to land the second or even third shot in a combination, but that's landing, and then again, you get the combination off, and you get your distance right, but he didn't disengage, which keeps some pressure on Sims. So if you get hit with one of 3 shots, or all 3, or a variation of a punch shot selection, and then the guy's still in the pocket, so you don't know if more is coming, you're ready to counterpunch, and he's catching. It's too much pressure on Sims. He's not dictating. He's trying to adjust. He's still playing catch up. Next thing you know, the fight is over. But he, again, down the stretch, I have to give him credit for finding some big eye-catching shots. I believe, maybe was it the end of round 5? The end of round 5, right at the bell, bing, and a couple of more before the fight was done, but he couldn't string them together. He found moments because, when you're combination punching, there's going to be opportunity for counter punching if you're being combination punched on. Sims occasionally did find those moments, but not enough. And it was just Barboza working off of the foundation he had laid early in the fight, and then setting traps. Setting traps. You don't know what he's going to do. You don't know if we're going back to the bodywork fundamentals. He would set things up downstairs, bring them upstairs, then start upstairs and go downstairs after catching a counter. Entertaining is not even the word I want to use right now. It was a skillful performance to make a point that I do belong at a higher level. I can beat this guy. Maybe, you're only as good as your last fight kind of thing isn't always true. And he wants to be regarded in a way that is more representative of his multiple skills and what he can do when he just executes a game plan and works off of what he sets up.
Yeah, and his balance was a little bit better. That was a little subtle difference in them too. Sims, sometimes when he's forced to come forward and open up first, he can fall in or get a little off balance compared to Barboza, who always had his base and his feet set underneath him. Problem for Barboza going forward is this worked against Catterall, who has that wide base and just looks to be very left-hand reliant in the southpaw stance. When he gets to be the guy who could pick up his feet and be more the boxer, he's more effective. He's not as comfortable being the guy who has to come forward. And the problem is when he fights the Keyshawn Davises, when he fights the Devin Haneys or the Ryan Garcias or the Teofimo Lopez, those guys got that exquisite quick twitch over him. And so that's an uphill climb for him. But in winning fights like these, you earn another bite at the apple, another big payday, another big opportunity. So that's why winning this fight was important for him. Another thing to note, I got to give a shout out to Jim Lampley because as he's coming to the ring, Barboza, I'm reminded of Jim pointing out in the Lopez fight. Barboza used to be a linebacker, used to play high school football and was well over 200 pounds. So even though they're both guys getting to 147, it's Barboza who's the bigger man. And by being a little bit the sharper puncher with that balance I mentioned, a little bit the bigger puncher. So he may not knock you out, but he'll have enough to keep you honest. And that is part of why Sims couldn't always be first and last. In addition to all those good technical breakdowns you gave about the traps being set and the different looks he was able to give. But credit to Barboza, man, because the broadcast, and hey, we can be, sometimes people would say we're being haters on the broadcast team. I got to give a shout out. You could be honest if you don't agree with me. I think Mannix, Grisham, and Mora, their chemistry has improved. And I think they're a significantly stronger trio now than they were a couple years ago on DAZN. And I've never loved DAZN's production values. And I got big respect for all three of those guys. Off camera, they're very gracious with me, which they don't have to be. They're the big shots who got the gig, right? But I'm not just saying that because of that. They've gotten a lot better, and I point that out because they mentioned Barboza was depressed coming into the ring. And I'm like, yeah, man, Sims may capitalize on this. He called you out. At first, you didn't really want this fight with him. You wanted something else. So maybe he's the one more up for it. Now that you're mentioning you were depressed after the Lopez fight, you might be coming into a fight you didn't really want low. And then once the lights went on and he heard his crowd that showed up to him, he was very lively coming to the ring. He had his swagger and came into the ring with a lot of confidence and showed out, did his thing.
Well, sometimes, like what we saw on Saturday, you get a contrast back to back. You get Dickens and Cacace and what that brings, the experience, as I've differentiated it from what we saw, well, at least especially me, because I watched the fights back to back. I didn't watch them in exact real time. So you get a contrast, a stark one, where you watch things back to back between that and what we saw with Barbosa and Sims. And then sometimes you'll get the same kind of contrast, a dynamic that makes you appreciate one thing more than you might have otherwise appreciated. Maybe I appreciated more what I saw from Sims and Barbosa, and in a way appreciated more what I saw from Dickens and Cacace because the dynamic was so different. The environment and the contrast was so stark watching them back to back. You can appreciate something more when you see kind of the opposite happening. So last week we were subjected to the Zuffa commentary. And now this week, you get the DAZN commentary. Now, we may not always be huge fans of the DAZN commentary. I thought they did a great job last night. Absolutely no criticism from me. And I thought Sergio Mora in particular was very good at setting the stage and giving us context and all that. But maybe we appreciate it a little more after having to listen to that Zuffa commentary.
Could be. Yeah. But also I gotta mention on the co-main, Oscar Collazo being able to look good, get a stoppage against an overmatched guy. And Gabriela Fundora, by the way, in against a 43-year-old opponent. She needs to be served up better opponents at this juncture, being one of the top pound for pound. I think it's going to be I can't see anyone really giving her hands full, and I'd have to do a deeper dive on these weight classes in women's boxing from 105 to 122. But the only fight I could see up until 26 that could give her some issues is Sky Nicholson, who is one-dimensional in her own way. She does not fight on the inside. She doesn't really have punching power, but that girl could box. She could really turn you and burn you with sharp, stinging punches. But Gabriela Fundora at 5'9" is just, she's too big for these girls. And now she's talking about going to 108. I don't think most of them have a prayer against her at this stage right now. It's going to take her until she gets from 126 to 135 for some girls to really challenge her. And then Collazo, he's a poor man's Bam Rodriguez, which means he's pretty good. Like, that it's a backhanded compliment, but it's a compliment. Like, he's pretty good. I mean, you could argue a prime Tua was a poor man's version of a prime Tyson. By the time Tua was in his prime, he might have actually beat Mike Tyson, as you'd recall, in the mid '90s, late '90s when he came to prominence. But like, I think, yeah, it's saying a prime David Tua is a poor man's prime Mike Tyson means David Tua was pretty good, and he was pretty good. I would say that about Collazo. He's a southpaw, lower weight class fighter, breaking guys down, got intelligence, got combinations, and good placement. But some people have him at the bottom of the pound for pound list, Raheem. I was more impressed with Jaio Pataya, even though he didn't get a stoppage like this kid Collazo from Puerto Rico did. I would argue more for Opataya to get in at the bottom of that pound for pound list than this kid Collazo, who's unified and the legit champ of the 105-pound division. And I just wanted to give that little extra shine to the undercard before we get out of here.
Well, I'll confess that I am not as deep a well when it comes to all the female fighters and their respective narratives. I mean, I watch it, obviously, we talk about it, but not at the extent that I probably should. And I will say, you know, I gotta say, maybe now it is what Jake Paul and MVP are doing is what Zuffa is pretending to do. Maybe just send all the ladies to MVP. I mean, I saw they tweeted out a picture with it looked like the jazz steps in Harlem in the Renaissance era with all those jazz musicians on one stoop. I mean, they put together a real serious roster. They're able to put on entire fight cards on excellent matchups. They've done it. And there are clearly women out there of great skill and champions that are not signed to MVP, and women's boxing exists outside of that. But I'm saying maybe the best thing for women's boxing is to kind of be at the moment in a silo where they can really all fight each other, where they can get the right matchups with one entity running it and see how that can make the case that all under one promotion, one umbrella, with a outfit that not only knows how to promote women's boxing, but has really eclipsed any other women's boxing promotion to date with consistency, might be the thing that elevates the sport as a whole. There's there is a way in which a certain monopoly of a element of the sport can be beneficial. I say that to say that again, we are not putting our blinders on or unwilling to see that maybe there's an evolution in the sport that could work. I don't think it means you need a UBO or you need an exemption from the Ali Act. I think it's a very, in fact, American outfit, this MVP, and can be done inside the rules of boxing with the belts that these women and men all want to fight for. But at the same time, if you have a promoter with a very specific vision and able to execute that vision and did in fact put women at the top of the card that got the most views of any fight by far, which of course I'm talking about the Netflix card with Jake Paul and Mike Tyson, who I believe the women at the top of that card, Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano, stole that show. That was by far the better matchup that we saw. And Jake Paul is able to put a main event on at the Madison Square Garden with women as well. Give them the opportunity really to run women's boxing for a minute and see if this can really rise all boats. I'm not really suggesting that every single woman sign with MVP, but my point is they're the force in the women's boxing element of the entirety of the boxing universe that's making some real headway, that seems to be committed, that has vision. And if you have something like that, that's how it's done. Yes, Jake Paul has talked his shit. Yes, he has highlighted what he's done in women's boxing, but not to ad nauseum. Most of the time, it's other people, even when they slag him off, as you might say, or talk shit about him, they still have to give it some credence and credit for what he's done with women's boxing. Even when they're criticizing him, he's done enough for people to have to put that in the conversation. That's how it's done, guys. If you're actually going to do something that impacts the sport, that changes it, that makes it better for a group of athletes, you're going to bring something new and innovative, and you have vision, believe it or not, I'm using Jake Paul as an example of how you do something kind of quietly, how
Mm.
you just show and prove and let it speak for itself. Not naming any names, but if somebody, I don't know
So
who needs to hear this, but that's how it's done.
you're saying without talking about running everything and without selling a big game with his mouth, he's actually moved the needle for them.
Yeah, he
He's
actually
had,
did something, and
yeah,
now
yeah,
we have to talk about it. Even when you are talking shit about him, if that's what you're into, you
right,
still got to give him credit for that. And he doesn't have to talk about it. He literally just does it. In
right.
promoting, he's promoting the women. He's not promoting Jake Paul in front of his fights. And he's a bigger star. He's definitely the person who could put himself out front and use the women as his backdrop. However, he's literally promoting his fighters and getting full fight cards of women where he's not at the main event now because he's done enough to promote these fighters and to get the interest going. And they're all going to be on Sky Sports at the top of the card, all women up there. You got to respect it. And at no point did I feel like he was browbeating us with some agenda or trying to redefine the four belts or trying to say that everything that happened in women's boxing before him was trash. He just came in, did the thing, used his own celebrity, his own position to promote the fighters that he wanted to promote, which were these women. And now they're standing on their own. He's got a whole roster of them. That's the place to be. Whether you're signed with them or not, you're likely to have the biggest stage, probably a good payday if you fight an MVP fighter. That's changing the game. And I have no problem with that. In fact, salute. Jake, if Jake Paul is your guide on how to do something kind of with some humility and quiet and class, then you know that you are way out over your skis in the other direction.
Yeah, yeah. Instead of saying we're gonna fucking sign everybody, he kind of has,
Just
and
did.
and instead of saying
Yeah.
like we're gonna put on the biggest fights, he kind of did
Just kind of
twice.
did
Yeah,
it.
he just actually did it. Right. We're
Yeah. And
getting
now we're just living in that world. And it's
right,
done.
right,
And
right.
now we have to mention it, and he has to do less promoting because we're so impressed by it. Imagine that.
Great point. Great point. Might also be your future politician too, if you didn't see either.
Well,
You
he's
know,
probably going to be more your politician.
right? Because you don't live
Fine.
here anymore in the United States, right? Got it. That's something to look forward to. But no. Anyways, I made a joke too. Well, not really a joke. A thought that I shared on our podcast multiple times. I'm like, I wouldn't be surprised if Zuffa and MVP merge one day. And they're like, but Dana and Jake Paul hate each other, and Undertaker and Stone Cold will never be partners. And it's like,
Hmm.
yeah, I don't know, man. If they both are successful in more or less monopolizing each avenue of the sport, if they were to come together, then that's literally everything under one umbrella. And I'm not dumb. I get it. People, both Nikisa and Dana have a horrible past. Yeah, I know. They also have history together. And Dana, at the end of the day, doesn't really own the UFC anymore, but that's a separate matter. And I understand Jake landed that 3-year deal with ESPN, so he doesn't need Zuffa. I'm just saying I can see a path to that happening. If there was ever one umbrella where you could basically get all the talent in boxing underneath, there's potential that one day that would be Zuffa and MVP. MVP handling the female talent, and that's another topic for another day.
I gotta give Jake credit. He does not strike me as the kind of guy that's done all this to go get a boss.
Yeah, no,
He's
I hear
not.
you.
He's not about to put himself under him. I mean, to me, that would be tarnishing his brand. What does
Right.
MVP want with Zuffa? Why would Jake Paul want to be dictated to by an executive board? Like he's
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
his he's the one that can set the mark because at any point if he gets at the top of the card, he can fill his undercard with his own fighters. He ain't about to start holding hands with anybody.
Yeah, fair. Right. He didn't even do that with Turkey, who gets everybody to hold his hand at some point. So,
You're supposed to just let that go, Sean. You weren't
no, no,
supposed to
I know, right? I don't.
it's
The implications enough, and then I have to be so on the
just
nose
you'll
with
see
it.
it now. You just
Yeah,
you just let that hang in the air, and then
yeah,
people are like, "What do you mean?"
right.
Oh,
Sorry, but one point of I guess some pushback to that idea you floated out there, why a Gabriela Fundora should go to MVP. Logic certainly checks out if that's where all the talent is. Although he's got to show he can deliver certain matchups, like now that it's all in house can he make a Caroline Dubois against Alicia Baumgartner? Baumgartner doesn't fancy that fight. She's the older fighter with the bigger name, at least here stateside. She would rather fight someone like that that's a big name and everything, and she's not keen on that matchup. She feels Dubois needs some leveling up to do profile wise, so for her to take that risk and everything. So we got to see how deft he can be as a promoter to deliver some of those matchups that we want to see, but maybe one of the talent doesn't want to do. But that aside, Gabriela Fundora right now, along with Clarissa Shields, you could argue they're carving it by not being a part of the MVP model. They stand out more as singular forces. Clarissa Shields just did 18,000 with her promotional company in Detroit. Fondora isn't at that level yet, but what she is right now, Raheem, is the darling, the sweetheart of women's boxing. Katie Taylor retired. Serrano, the great Amanda Serrano, is in the twilight of her career. She's not in her prime anymore. And she's not a new face. Clarissa, to me, is the best fighter in women's boxing, pound for pound, but she's a polarizing figure who's turning off a lot of people, also has her supporters. Fondora is a new face. She's a fresh face. She smiles a lot and is very agreeable and nice to the and comes across as very nice. And she is a nice person, but very mean in the ring. And people love that juxtaposition. That's a juxtaposition that people loved about the old school fighters, was gentlemen outside the ring, killers in the ring. She's a gentlewoman outside the ring, a killer in the ring. And she is right now and will pick apart and ask for harder competition. And when is she going to move up in weight and fight girls as tall as she is or closer to her size and all? But for right now, she is the darling sweetheart of women's boxing. Everybody, she's got 4 straight knockouts, which doesn't happen often at the championship level in boxing. What I'm getting at is she gets to stand apart, as does Clarissa Shields, as more of a singular force. She is the focus, the sole focus of her promotion, just like Clarissa Shields is the sole focus of her promoter. If she goes to MVP, perhaps the money would be even better. The stage would be bigger. But you are now no longer isolated as the singular star of the show for women's boxing.
Yeah, I would sign on to that.
Michaela Mayer benefited from that with Top Rank, and now she's with MVP as well.
Yeah, but okay,
right.
Let me jump in now.
Right.
Because I would sign on to that with Clarissa, who is an anomaly, right? She was able to get her $8 million deal on her own. She's able to sell out her spot. She is I don't know if you call it a media darling or an internet sensation, but she definitely keeps her name and her face, and her profile out there. People are talking about her. She's the biggest star in boxing for women. Excuse me. She's the biggest star in boxing for women. However, the fight that she wants, the one that she needs, both, I would say 2 fights. The one, I would say the Michaela Mayer fight for sure. Where's Michaela Mayer? I'd say the Shadesha Green fight, 100%. Where's Shadesha Green? Like, those will make for some really big cards and a great main event. And Clarissa can bring a universe with her and meet this MVP universe and both benefit from it. She doesn't need to sign the MVP. Of course, if she did, it would be game over. Like, then MVP would really rule the roost, right? But Clarissa doesn't need to sign the MVP. In fact, she might be better in exactly all the things that you just laid out, and taking advantage of that kind of scenario. And forgive me, but the girl that you're talking about, that's the kind of girl that needs to sign with MVP. That is the kind of girl that needs to live in the universe, get these matchups on undercards for a minute, build that darling kind of fan base if that's there for her, and doesn't really benefit from being a silo, but climbing a ladder inside the promotion and making her and just making herself a distinction from the rest. So yeah, at this point, in a way, even if you are in a silo, whether you're, Clarissa Shields, who can drive her own career and be the captain of her own ship, still needs MVP to maximize her potential. She can do it on her own, but it won't be the maximized potential. MVP's gonna have to get involved, and that I think as you say, I mean, Katie Taylor's got one more fight. Obviously, that could be done without MVP. But her biggest fights, her biggest moments, the ones that got her the most viewership, the ones that'll probably set her up for this Croker farewell fight that she's wanted her whole
Oh, so
career.
she is having a fair. My apologies. I thought she announced her retirement, and so
No,
okay.
no,
So
she's having one more. It's going to be a Croker.
this is the farewell retirement
But
fight. Got it. My
but
fault.
even Katie Taylor is not where she is and have the visibility and brand recognition globally that she has without those MVP Serrano fights.
Right.
That's just fact, right? She's now got that as part of her legacy forever, and it's a big deal. They've done it. They've done it. Now, to your point, let's see how they execute it, how they navigate it. What happens now that you have all these fighters and you are kind of the center of the universe? How, as a promoter, you navigate these things in-house? What's best for the fighter? What's best for the show? What you can convince a fighter to do that doesn't want to do it? Can you have the vision to make this thing really reach its, potential, or even maybe one day become on par with men's boxing, which is a very lofty goal. But I can see where it benefits women's boxing to have somebody with vision like a Jake Paul, having enough leverage and enough fighters and enough ability to put on shows independently to create a center of the universe where everybody can benefit. That is what he's done, and I like the way he's done it. And like I say, the theme of this show is contrast. You see it being done one way here and another way here, back to back. You can get a real clear picture of what is good about one thing and what is missing from another thing when you see them back to back. If you look at the way MVP is moving and the way Zuffa is moving, with all the money, all the outlets, all the media shills, all the selling, I'd say MVP is doing a much better job at exactly what Zuffa's promising.